It looks like the Indiana Fever had to go and hire a new shout-out specialist, a shout-out coordinator, because Stephanie White has failed to give Caitlin Clark the proper props and respect for her performances. And it looks like the Indiana Fever might have made some changes because they are sick and tired of getting blasted because of Stephanie White's post-game antics, and she tried it again.
Something happened in Indiana, and the fan base is not okay. Stephanie White, the head coach of the Indiana Fever, held a press conference, and Caitlin Clark's name never left her mouth. Not once. In a moment where every person in that room, every camera, every microphone was there because of Caitlin Clark, her coach found a way to talk around her like she was a ghost, and the fans caught it immediately. Clips started spreading, screenshots started circulating, then came the part that really lit the fuse. An assistant coach stepped in and said the name White wouldn't say. Whether that was intentional, unscripted, or a carefully managed moment, nobody knows for sure. But here's what is certain. The Fever faithful are furious. And this situation runs a lot deeper than a single press conference. This is about power, recognition, and what happens when the biggest name in women's basketball doesn't hear her name spoken by the one person who should be saying it most. You're probably already asking yourself why a head coach would avoid mentioning her own star player by name in front of the media. Is this a strategic media tactic, or is there something more uncomfortable brewing inside that building? And if the assistant coach felt the need to step in and say Clark's name out loud, what does that unscripted moment actually reveal about the staff dynamic behind closed doors? But then it goes even deeper than that. Is Stephanie White feeling overshadowed by the player she's supposed to be leading? Because coaching the most watched player in women's basketball history is not a small assignment, and not every coach handles that kind of spotlight with grace. And maybe the question you haven't let yourself sit with yet is this one. Could this kind of tension, even if it's subtle, even if nobody ever admits it publicly, actually be shaping the way Caitlin Clark is being deployed and developed on this team? That is the question this whole video is built around. This video is going to break down exactly what happened in that press conference moment by moment, so you can see it clearly and decide for yourself whether this was calculated or completely misread by the internet. You will understand the specific exchange where the assistant coach stepped in, why the room reacted the way it did, and what Stephanie White's pattern of language across multiple recent media appearances might actually be telling us about the culture inside the Fever organization. You will also get the full picture of where the fan base stands, why this moment hit differently than your average coach controversy, and what it could mean for Caitlin Clark's trajectory if the people around her are not fully bought in. This is not just drama. There is a real leadership story unfolding here, and you are going to leave this video with a completely new way of looking at it. But before we get into all of it, do you think Stephanie White is intentionally distancing herself from Caitlin Clark's name, or is the fan base reading way too much into this? Drop your take in the comments. 4 wins in a row. That number does not lie, and the reason behind it is simpler than anyone in that organization wants to publicly admit. The Fever spent the opening stretch of this season running a style of basketball that made absolutely no sense for a roster built around Caitlin Clark, and the losses piled up exactly the way you would expect them to. The moment they stopped resisting the obvious and started feeding their franchise player the way she deserves to be fed, the entire team transformed. But here is where it gets uncomfortable. The locker room celebration you just saw was not led by the head coach. An assistant coach, someone the average fan cannot name, walked into that room and delivered the energy, the recognition, and the acknowledgement that Stephanie White has consistently failed to bring. He said Clark's name. He made the moment feel like something, and the fact that it took an unnamed assistant to do what a head coach should do naturally tells you everything about where this situation actually stands right now.
When it comes to the Indiana Fever to start out the season, but the last 4 games, when they have finally conceded and decided, hey, we're going to play Caitlin Clark ball, they have won 4 in a row. And that's why I think it is over. It is dead for the Stephanie White style of play. Now, we know Stephanie White has continually dropped the ball and embarrassed Caitlin Clark in post-game situations, kind of refusing to shout her out and things like that. But it looks like They took that duty off of Stephanie White's hands, even though she botched the press conference damn near. We got to get into that. Let's go to the post-game locker room.
Hey, hey, hey! Hey, hey, hey! All right, y'all, good job. Really good job. Finally having some breathing room, shortening those stretches. I mean, we did a lot of really good things. 69% assist rate, great job. 4 in double figures, 3 with 20s. We had runs of 28-12, 17-4. I mean, we did some really good stuff. 113 points, a regulation record. More than anything, y'all, we played together. Okay, we played together collectively. We're starting to get connected on both ends of the floor. We're closing our fist. All right, they had a little run. We answered the run. Okay, really good stuff. They only shot 19 free throws. Very, very good.
Kelsey tied Candace.
All right, so you see, where'd he come from? They said they went and found this dude on Indeed somewhere. This is crazy. No disrespect, brother. I don't know your name, man. Look, bro.
You are probably sitting there wondering why the assistant coach is the one running the post-game speech after a 4-game winning streak. That alone should feel strange to you. But then you start pulling at the thread a little more, and you realize this is not just one weird moment. This feels like a pattern. So you start asking yourself whether Stephanie White is being deliberately kept away from the microphone after games, or whether she is choosing to step back on her own. And then the bigger question creeps in. If the organization is quietly managing who speaks and who gets credit just to make sure Caitlin Clark feels seen, how long can that kind of behind-the-scenes workaround actually hold together? Because patching over a leadership problem with an assistant coach is not a long-term solution. And the question you probably have not fully formed yet, but can feel building is this one. What happens to this winning streak the moment that internal tension stops being manageable? The honest read here is that Stephanie White is a coach whose identity and system were built for a completely different kind of roster. What you are watching right now is a franchise quietly engineering around her limitations without fully committing to replacing her, and that is one of the most fragile positions any organization can put itself in. The 4-game winning streak is real, and it is earned, but it happened because the team leaned fully into Caitlin Clark, not because Stephanie White suddenly unlocked something as a coach. The assistant coach moment felt managed. It felt like someone inside that building made a deliberate call to make sure Clark received her recognition publicly because the head coach was not going to deliver it naturally or consistently. That kind of workaround does not disappear when the winds are flowing. It just gets buried under the noise. And the press conference that followed this exact winning streak is where that buried tension finally broke through the surface in a way nobody could ignore. The shout-out coordinator line is funny until you realize it is not actually a joke. Stephanie White stood in front of the media after a dominant win and found a way to praise Leah Boston, found a way to praise Kelsey Mitchell, and somehow never arrived at Caitlin Clark. Not once. That is not an accident. That is a pattern with a paper trail long enough to wallpaper an entire arena. And the fact that the fan base has now given a random assistant coach a nickname based on how he appeared out of nowhere just to do the job the head coach refuses to do tells you exactly how exhausted people are with this dynamic. To be fair, the assistant did say the name. He acknowledged Clark's record-breaking assist numbers and gave her the credit she earned. That part is right. But the delivery was flat, the energy was low, and a player of Caitlin Clark's caliber deserves recognition that actually matches the moment she is creating on that court.
Taker, who is this? Who is this? You mean to tell me y'all had to go hire a shout-out coordinator because Stephanie White refused to shout out Caitlin Clark over and over? This is insanity. Let's hear it, man. Let's hear. You heard Stephanie White going on and on. 19 free throws, this percentage, this, that. She was able to shout out Leah Boston for it, Kelsey Mitchell before, all this stuff. She never went to shout out Caitlin Clark. Now we got somebody that popped up from under the ring like The Undertaker, and he's doing shout outs. They done hired a damn a shout out coordinator specialist.
Very, very good.
Kelsey tied Candace Parker and Skylar Diggins for 13th most 25-point games. He moved up to second most in Fever history in assists in a single game. Soph tied in assists in a single game.
Hold on.
25-point games. He moved up to second most in Fever history. history in assists in a single game.
Okay, he says CC moved up to second for the assist. At least he said it.
You are sitting there thinking, how does a head coach shout out two teammates by name and completely skip the player who just broke a franchise record? That question alone should be making your head spin. But then you start wondering whether Stephanie White is even aware of how visible this pattern has become. Because at this point, the fan base is cataloging every single press conference looking for Clark's name like they are searching for a missing person. And then the deeper question arrives. Is this personal? Or is White operating from some coaching philosophy that genuinely does not believe in centering one player publicly, even when that player is carrying the team statistically? Because those are two very different problems with two very different solutions. And the one question that sits underneath all of it is whether Caitlin Clark herself has noticed and what it quietly does to a player's relationship with her coach when the omission keeps happening this consistently. Here is the reality. When you shout out supporting players by name after a win, but leave out the franchise cornerstone who just climbed to second in Fever history for assists in a single game, you are not being balanced or humble or team first. You are making a choice. Coaches understand the power of public recognition better than almost anyone, and choosing who gets it and who does not is never truly neutral. The assistant coach stepped in and said the name, and that matters. But low-energy acknowledgement after a historic performance is almost worse than silence because it signals that the recognition is obligatory rather than genuine. This is not a one-game story. This is a coaching relationship that appears to be running on managed tension rather than real trust. And what makes this even more significant is that the press conference footage tells an even sharper version of this same story. 21 points, 14 assists, a franchise record 113 points scored, and when a reporter hands Stephanie White the perfect opportunity to talk about what drove that offensive explosion, she pivots to defense. Not offense. Defense. A reporter asked her specifically about the offense humming, and White steered the entire answer away from the player who was literally dictating the tempo of that game with her passing. That is not a coaching philosophy. That is avoidance with a microphone in front of it. To be fair, pace and defensive energy do connect to offensive output in basketball. That part is technically true, but you do not get to score a franchise record 113 points in regulation. Watch your point guard rack up 14 assists running your entire operation, and then answer an offense question by talking about defense without people noticing exactly what you just did. And the fans noticed. Every single one of them.
You know, the Indiana Fever have hired a shout-out coordinator. Now, we got to get to Stephanie White in the postgame because in this postgame, they specifically ask about the offense and how did the offense get going the way it was. Now, we saw the ball was in Caitlin Clark's hands. The girl had 21 points and 14 assists. Did she shoot it great? No, but 14 assists shows you she was dictating. She was dictating tempo, getting the ball to people. Watch where Stephanie White tries to take this and make this about.
Steph, 113 is the most the Fever have ever scored in a non-overtime game. What did you see humming offensively, and especially the last couple games? It felt like you guys have taken some steps on that end of the floor.
I think our pace is better, and our pace is going to be better when we're better defensively.
She immediately went to the defense. Bro, they ask you about the offense. All you had to say was, yo, our pace has been better. Caitlin Clark was definitely pushing the ball 14 to 6. Bro, it's simple. It's simple. Come on, man.
You probably caught that pivot in real time and thought, wait, they asked about the offense and she just redirected the entire answer. That is the first thing that hits you. But then you start rewinding the logic and wondering how a coach watches her point guard deliver 14 assists in a single game and does not feel the natural pull to mention that player when discussing why the offense worked. And then a sharper question forms. Is Stephanie White actively constructing her press conference answers to avoid giving Caitlin Clark credit? Or has she genuinely convinced herself that the team's offensive success exists separately from what Clark is doing on the floor? Because both of those possibilities are alarming for completely different reasons. And underneath all of it sits the question that should be making you deeply uncomfortable right now. If this is how White speaks about Clark publicly after a historic win, what does the communication inside that building actually look like? 14 assists is not a quiet contribution. It means Caitlin Clark touched nearly every meaningful offensive possession in that game. She was the engine, the decision maker, and the reason teammates were getting clean looks all night. When a coach redirects an offense question toward defense after a performance like that, it does not read as humility or tactical depth. It reads as a deliberate reframing designed to keep one player's name out of the headline. That is a problem coaches in every major league eventually get held accountable for, because players talk, front offices watch, and fan bases remember. The pattern here is no longer deniable. It has shown up in locker room speeches, in post-game pressers, and now in direct questions about a record-breaking offensive night. And what makes the next piece of this story even harder to dismiss is that Stephanie White was given one more chance to get it right, and what she did instead was somehow worse. What started as a single press conference moment has revealed something much bigger, a coaching relationship held together by workarounds, managed optics, and an assistant coach filling a void the head coach keeps leaving open. The pattern is documented, the fan base is locked in, and the winds are flowing in spite of the tension, not because of it. Here is the cold truth. When an organization quietly engineers recognition for its own franchise player because the head coach won't deliver it naturally, that is not a sustainable team culture. That is a countdown. If this dynamic interests you, if you want the analysis that actually goes beneath the surface of what's happening inside the Fever, subscribe, because this story is far from over, and you are going to want to be here when the next chapter breaks.